This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And it looks like the catch and release policy at the border is working as well as about the catch and release policy Cook County State's Attorney's Office has here for street criminals. AP reporting on the Yuma sector, San Luis, Arizona. More than 120% spike in the number of families and unaccompanied children caught at the border over the last year.
Wow.
So far this fiscal year, agents in the Yuma sector have apprehended nearly 10,000 families and 4,500 unaccompanied children. 7 years ago, they arrested 98, and there were 222 unaccompanied children. 98 to 10,000, 222 to 4,500 in 7 years. The AP suggesting the Trump administration's policy of separating families did not seem to be slowing the flow either. They have been apprehending an average of 30 families per day in June when the uproar over the policy was at its peak, which was an increase from the month before. Yuma is now the second busiest sector for family border crossing next to Rio Grande Valley in Texas. I know there's a lot of emotion and sentimentality surrounding the family separation policy, but again, Trump, Congress, the electorate, what would you have them do if you're serious about border security? If you're serious about people coming into this country, concerned about people coming into this country unvetted? A small fraction maybe, but impactful nonetheless, who are not coming here to be productive and law-abiding. Like, for example, an Iraqi refugee charged with shooting a Colorado police officer last week, who was set for deportation before a 2016 federal appellate court ruled that a portion of immigration law defining violent crime was too vague. He was ordered removed from the country on June 13, 2016. The AP talked to a Homeland Security official on the condition of anonymity. Couldn't talk about the case on the record. They began deportation proceedings in 2015, scheduled for deportation June of 2016. Not deported, not in custody, shot a Colorado police officer last week. You know, Kate Steinle, cases like this, you got to tell these stories so people understand it's not just data points and statistics. Human lives that don't have to be lost or endangered if we just had sensible border security policy as part of our overall national security policy. And so the question comes to Republicans, really, in the wake of this narrow apparent victory yesterday by Troy Balderson in Ohio. You really want to kick this issue past the November election? You really don't want to do anything about it? President Trump, are you really going to let House and Senate Republicans get away with not doing anything about it? Or do you want to encourage and energize Trump voters, frankly, and also a lot of sensible Americans? These are 70% issues. You can be pro-legal immigration and still, obviously, be a proponent of sensible border security policy. You really want to push this off until after the midterms. I think it's a mistake. For more on this topic and other geopolitical matters, we're pleased to be joined again by Cliff May, President for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Cliff, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always good to be with you.
So what about this? I mean, I know that you think kind of globally, but certainly border security is a global issue for America. And so your reaction to how this is playing out on the Hill?
Well, it very much is a global issue. It very much is a national security issue. The case you mentioned makes that fairly obvious. But I'm not sure people understand that in Venezuela, a socialist state with close ties to the regime in Iran and to others, we know they've been giving out false Venezuelan passports to various people from the Middle East. So we also know that they've been doing other things to support terrorists, including terrorists who might come to the United States. It's very important that we know who's crossing our border and for what reasons, and not be allowing terrorists to come in. And frankly, we need an immigration system, and I think most Americans do agree with this, that is fair, that is good for the United States, that allows people to come here and to immigrate into this country if they can contribute to it and believe in its ideals, but our border should not be essentially broken screen doors, kind of shaking on their hinges. Anybody should not be able to come here and simply claim all the rights and entitlements that Americans have. There are tens of millions of people who would like to. It'll break our back if we allow that to happen. We need a system to vet and to clear and to bring in people we want to bring in, and to say to some, sorry, we'll help you as much as we can in your own countries.
Now, the Trump administration is weighing citizen limits for legal immigrants, so they want to make legal status or citizenship tougher if anyone in the household used, say, any public assistance program such as Obamacare or was on food stamps. The president could do this all by himself. It does not need congressional approval. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a domestic policy which I haven't given a lot of thought, but it doesn't strike me as necessarily unfair. One problem we have is that we have a welfare state, and if people are coming in here to take advantage of the welfare state, if people are coming in here and are being told by various groups, as soon as you get inside the United States, you have the right to welfare, you have the right to health care, you have the right to housing care, you have the right to food stamps, you have the right to education. Again, this is going to be quite a burden on taxpayers. I think it is correct for members of Congress to say, how many immigrants do we want to take every year? What kind of immigrants do we want to take? And what is the impact on the welfare state and on those who are paying taxes? And there needs to be serious study of those who have been coming in to see what percentage remain dependent on taxpayers for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Right now, that's not very much part of the debate. American citizens have the right to decide whom to welcome and whom to take, and who they think they would like to have as fellow citizens. And those people should have a path to citizenship, but they should be people who believe in American principles and people who are not here simply for the benefits that this country provides.
The other day, we had General Mad Dog Mattis, our defense secretary, discuss negotiations with the Taliban for an armistice of some sort and the return of 15,000 American troops deployed over there at some point in the not-too-distant future. Here's what General Mattis had to say.
You talk about the reports that the U.S. is now directly engaging with Taliban officials?
Yeah, I think it would probably be best if we left that to State Department that leads any kind of reconciliation effort on our part. Again, it is Afghan-led and an Afghan-owned process as we work with them to bring peace to that country that's been through enough war.
Yeah, well, the return of the Taliban doesn't mean peace, at least for a lot of Afghan citizens. But can you translate what the defense secretary is saying there for us?
Well, I think he's saying that we're not going to interfere, and with the Afghan government, if it wants to negotiate with the Taliban, we'll support those efforts. But I think, and I hope I'm getting this right, that he is realistic and skeptical about the possibility of the Taliban putting down its weapons and making peace. The Taliban is intimately tied to Al-Qaeda. The Taliban, its purpose in life is to fight jihad against the West. There's no such thing as a good Taliban. I don't think that there's much likelihood for a diplomatic solution with the Taliban is concerned any more than I do with Al-Qaeda.
So are we looking really for a press release to say we struck some kind of accord and that'll be the cover to pull troops out?
I think we don't have a solution in Afghanistan right now. I don't think there's been a lot of thought and a lot of debate on this. I don't think it's been a top policy priority. At least at this point, I don't think we're winning the war in Afghanistan. I think it's difficult to do. but I also think it is not as important an issue right now as, for example, Iran is or North Korea is. It's more a question of mowing the lawn. It's not great that we have to do it, but right now it's sort of in a stalemate situation.
President Trump's decision to slap what he called the most biting sanctions ever on Iran, they seem to dismiss it and said, well, we'll just rely on the Russians and the Chinese. Do you think that this will be enough to change things?
Well, it is changing things inside Iran. The sanctions that we've had, the sanctions that are being reimposed today, the sanctions that will be reimposed additionally in November, they are part of the reason that Iran's economy is in such dire straits, and it absolutely has been getting dire. The good news is that most Iranians understand that this is not America's fault. Their economy is in terrible shape after generations, 2 generations, 3 generations, since 1979 of mismanagement and corruption. But it certainly adds to it when the U.S. says, we're not going to trade with you, and anybody who wants to trade with you can't trade with the United States. You're a rogue government, and we want changes in your behavior, and until we get them, we're going to put a serious economic pressure on the government and on key figures in the Iranian government. Now, there are various outcomes that I think from a U.S. perspective would be good. One is that the Iranian government does change its behavior, stops supporting terrorism, stops its support of Bashar al-Assad, which includes mercenary troops, Shia militias comprised of poor Afghans, poor Pakistanis, and others who for very little go and essentially are cannon fodder. They need the Iranian government is oppressing its own people. Women who don't want to wear the hijab are ending up going to jail. The Iranian regime continues to, we believe, it continues its missile program in various ways. The Israelis proved that when they managed to steal the archives out of Tehran on the missile program. Pressure is being put for this regime to change its ways or for the regime to change. I think it's the right thing to do because it's a rogue regime based on the motto of death to America and death to Israel. Why would we want to be trading with them?
National Security Advisor Bolton suggested there's no evidence that North Korea is denuclearizing at this point. With respect to North Korea, and I know there's sort of back-channel communications with the State Department and Secretary of State Pompeo, do we just need to sort of modulate our expectations that there's only going to be any kind of substantial breakthrough that we could really believe or trust in the near term?
In the near term, I don't think we're seeing much progress. I suspect John Bolton, among others, recognizes that. I think the only way to get real progress here is to do what President Trump had said he was going to do in terms of North Korea, and that is maximum pressure. The sanctions are not as strong as they need to be. When we do serious sanctions, people talk about sanctions on Cuba or sanctions on Iran over the past few years. It's like saying you hit me. Well, you can hit me with your open fist, or you can hit me with a sledgehammer. The sanctions mean different things depending on how you apply them. We have the ability to impose sanctions in a way that at least threatens the implosion of the economy of North Korea and threatens the implosion of the economy of Iran. Our sanctions should not, in these two cases, be merely symbolic, be merely a gesture, be merely an inconvenience for these regimes. We should threaten them with the possibility that their economies will collapse. If we do that, they may decide that there are some of their behaviors to which we object, they are going to change rather than have that happen. That's not the case with North Korea at the moment. In exchange for the summit, President Trump did not continue to accelerate sanctions. I think it's getting very much to the point where we have to begin to do that. He didn't relieve any sanctions pressure, but the sanctions pressure is not enough to really frighten Kim Jong-un, and he needs to be frightened that his regime, his dynasty, could collapse. Until we get to that point, he will not change his behavior. He will say, I'm going to do what my father and my grandfather did. I'm going to make promises. I'm going to make gestures. I'm going to try to get American money. He's not getting that at the moment. And I'm going to fool them because I'm smarter than they are.
He is Cliff May, president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Cliff, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer.